What's going on, people? Welcome back to the channel. Now, there's been a bit of a polarizing conversation that's been had over the last kind of 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even a month at this point, as CS2 being released, and of course the beta being open now. We all kind of came to the realization pretty quickly that MR12 is where things are heading, and realistically speaking, it's probably going to be the same case heading in towards the more esports side of thing. Of course, that's where we kind of do a lot of our good work and a lot of our focus. And obviously, with the announcement being made, I was out in Iași in Romania, and I was with Anders at the time, and we had a little bit of a conversation at dinner, just talking about what the implications are for us. Where does he kind of lie on the fence of? Is he pro MR12? Is he anti MR12? And after my conversation with him and having a little troll through Twitter and seeing some of the more vocal voices in the scene, so to say, I want to make a little video talking about kind of what MR12 means for the scene going forward, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, and what we should expect maybe heading in towards like 2024, 25, etc, etc. So I've brought on 4 guests to have a conversation, and they lie kind of different ends of the spectrum, essentially. We've got Anders, of course, my good buddy Anders. He's very pro MR12, and we'll get into his reasons why in just a little bit. We've got another guy who is pro MR12, but with a few changes, that of Nero himself. Of course, recently, with a HRTV article that's been done, he's very in the know about everything MR12. His opinion, he said, has changed a few times, but right now he lies pretty pro MR12. Just a few changes needed, so a little bit more towards the middle ground. Then middle ground maybe on the other side, not anti-MR12, but definitely thinks there should be other changes made instead, is that of Davey. Of course, he was very vocal on Twitter, hence why I wanted to bring him involved. And of course, last but certainly not least, the man himself, Aizyesque. Elliot was very anti-MR12 and is very anti-MR12. So we have 4 guys alongside the spectrum, and I'll slot myself in somewhere at the end of the video. So before we get into all of this, if you're new around here, please do subscribe, like, all of the good stuff. Let's get into towards the interviews.
Let's see what I think about MR12. I feel it's okay. A bit gonna be uncomfortable at the beginning to count money, count economy. But I mean, first of all, Navi will stop be late on practice because I'm usually late. That's very good thing, and we'll have like 10-15 minutes before next scrim, and that means that it's insane news. It's very good boost for my team and for me especially.
What do you think about MR12? Not a big fan of it, but I'm curious to see how it will play out. I mean, the biggest reason why I'm not a big fan of it is because we have used MR15 like ever since CS is out there, you know.
So I have 3,000.
So that's the only
2.1?
my concern, but it might be better for the game. Might be, I don't know, worse, I don't know. I think we all just need to shut the fuck up and see how it's gonna work out. There is too much hate going on around CS2, and me not like.
We got game.
Thoughts on MR12? I think I dislike it as well. But if people want to try it, I don't care. I think it's gonna be even more random results. Pistol rounds. They have to change pistol rounds. It's just too. They have too much impact.
Switching to MR12. Personally, I don't really like it as a player. I've always liked the MR15 and all the adaptations to the game, because I feel like CSGO has even evolved now to a state where every team has a game plan. They usually run a set first gun round or a bonus round with MAC-10s if they win the pistol on T side. And there is a lot of these different things where I feel like on MR12, the game is so fast paced that you can rely a lot more on gimmicks, and the difference between MR15, I feel like it's always the end game where the top teams adapt and they try to counter the game plan of their opponents. And I feel like with MR12, it's gonna be a bit random because it's so much more fast paced, and you need to make much more calculated decisions because you have fewer rounds. So
yeah, I mean, we'll see. I think it's difficult to predict how it's going to be. I mean, for me, obviously the games can be long, and I understand from the TO's point of view and from Valve that you need the viewership to be a little bit more exciting, and the games can be long and all these things. But I think as a coach, you also want to have a little bit more rounds, you know, to gain back momentum. I think we've seen some classic comebacks, history comebacks. So I don't know what to think. I think they need to do a couple of more switches. The only thing I'm concerned about is they're going to keep the best of one. So let's say we go to an RMR, playing a best of one. Only MR12, you lose both pistols. That's going to be rough now.
Imagine you're playing MR12 and you lose both pistols. How bad off are you?
Well, you're gonna be in trouble. Especially if you lose the first buy round as well.
I'm joined by none other than Anders himself. First of all, thank you very much for joining me. You obviously have been, on Twitter, pretty pro MR12. We had a bit of a conversation in Romania as well, talking about it. But talk me why. Why, as someone who's been around for such a long time within CSGO and always going to be an MR15, why for you now are you very pro MR12?
Well, I mean, I guess part of it is I also come from like an era of where we actually did play MR12 anyway in CS 1.6 or even I think in 1.3 or something like that. So I mean, I've played in online tournaments that played that format, so it's not completely alien to me. I guess there are like a lot of different ways to attack it. One of them I think would be like my argument so far has been something like what you're losing by cutting down to MR12 is probably the tactical space in which a really good in-game leader can sort of, gather information and then use that information for something productive, down the road. And obviously down the road meaning the extra more rounds that you have. But the problem with this argument, I think, is why not then make it MR 17 or 19 or 21, right? Like if that's the thing that you value the most about the game, if that's what is Counter-Strike, like that's the essence of Counter-Strike right there, then why not stretch it the other way, right? Like you're going to get more of that. So I'm not sure like anyone has a really good answer to that. I feel like a lot of people are just arguing from habit, like people are just used to this, and that's just how it's going to be. Also, who's to say that, like, why, if you say the best in-game leader could do this, well, I don't know, why couldn't the best in-game leader just figure it out earlier? Why not just, be more prepared showing up to a game, or, if you can't figure it out, then the consequences are more dire more early on, and you're probably going to be playing best of 3 anyway. I don't know, like I feel like the arguments are kind of a little bit weak, and to be honest I feel like there's so much room to manipulate things anyway. Like you can manipulate the economy, you could manipulate the round time, although that's probably going to be quite tricky, but sure. But there are other valves to fiddle with here in my opinion.
So how do you think this affects not only, so I guess we've got two main sides, the esports, like kind of the pro side of things, and then obviously the casual side of things, because there's been conversations about how by reducing the time of games, obviously, CSGO right now is longer than most traditional sports. I know Hedge TV has that graph. It means for the casual viewer, it gives them more ability to watch an entire game. I think most people, aside from kind of us who are like very hardcore or work in the industry, it's very tough, I think, for a casual person to watch an entire 3.5, 4 hour series, or if it goes to best of 5, it can be like 8-9 hours in some worst case scenarios. So what do you think? How do you think it affects not only kind of the casual side of things, where maybe kind of the average viewer can watch a whole game, but also the esports side of things? How do you think it will affect kind of what we see in like regular show days, or how many games get played per day, or also kind of what the skill ceiling is like, whether the skill ceiling gets higher or lower? I
mean, I think it now it's more of a rarity for us to have like 4 best of 3s a day. That used to be way more common, but I'm glad. I hope that we're still not going to be doing that even with MR12. I don't think it's worth it. But obviously sometimes for like tournaments for cost reasons or whatever, it makes sense to try and do that kind of thing. But it is I think it's pretty rough from a viewership point of view. I think if you think about it from like a tournament point of view, this is probably where I try to like come at it now. Is like if I was 15, 16 and I was trying to talk my parents into taking me to a Counter-Strike event, and I'm saying it's going to be like 2 or 3 days inside of an arena, and every one of those days is going to be like 10, but it could be like 12 hours. Like it's so crazy. It's so dramatic. Like no one else is gonna ever say yes to this. Like if you go watch a football match or something, like maybe you show up like, and I don't know, I've only been to one ever, but let's say you show up a little bit early. The game's like 90 minutes. Maybe you stay a little afterwards to try and get like fan signed t-shirts or whatever, but you're not gonna be there for like 5 hours total, right? Like that's crazy. So I just think it means we're only going to get like a particular kind of audience that has time to which is cool, but I think why not try and expand it to get more people involved?
Okay, I like it. So it allows the casual person and I guess the not so hardcore guys to be a little bit more involved. But also, what about the esports sort of thing? I mean, there's a conversation with less rounds? Does it lower the skill ceiling, make it a little bit more random? And we think of as well the conversation people talking about best of ones in MR12 seem very, very janky too. So how do you think it's going to affect the esport? Do you think the game as a whole, because you've got less rounds to work with, you have to be smarter quicker and figure out your opponents quicker, so therefore the skill ceiling rises? Or do you think because there's less rounds to work with and maybe the T-side economy could snowball, that potentially it allows some more upsets? Where do you think things lie there?
I don't know. I think, to be honest, like this is going to be some real fence-sitting stuff, but I could probably argue both sides of this, right? Like, I could argue that, you know, best of ones are going to be really exciting because it will be a test of who is more prepared from the outset, and you're going to find out really quickly if a team is already dialed in, and if you find out that one team is not prepared or, you know, can't defend a bomb site well enough or whatever, then they're going to have almost no time to adjust, and it's going to be really tricky. I guess the big concern probably from like a competitive integrity level, if you're really playing best of ones, I mean, you can make an argument that it's just not that necessary to play a lot of best of ones in the future. Yeah. But if you're worried about that kind of thing, I mean, the complaint I think will be, well, what if suddenly winning both pistol rounds dictates like 50% of the game? You know, it just has that kind of an impact. And I would say, if that happens, I'm pretty sure Valve are going to be monitoring that situation, and you can try to change that in other ways, right? You can probably impact that in other ways to maybe change the CT economy a little bit, so that, you know, because obviously going on a double eco with an MR12 format can be pretty punishing, right? Especially if you do it after losing both pistol rounds, and let's say you have another reset down the road, like you could end up playing 70% of a half or something with almost no money in the bank, right? And that might be a really weird experience to both play and watch. Mm-hmm. But I think if we see a lot of that, if that suddenly becomes a trend and you're saying like, wow, it's really weird to watch these CT sides where people just run around with pistols all the time, or they're just force buying all the time because there's no, like, you have to, right?
Yeah.
I think there are other ways to solve it. I don't think it could be like an effect that gets amplified in MR12, but I don't think I think you can fiddle around with that in other ways. I'm not too concerned with it.
Okay, and last question to talk about is, let's go on the assumption that MR12 is locked in place, which we kind of probably know it is. The fact that they're implementing it towards competitive, it is going to be what's locked in place for the competitive scene. What do you think needs to change now to make it more viable? There's been conversations, you know, for example, Nero proposed one which was reducing the times of Molotovs and smokes to make them a little bit shorter, so therefore gives you more active time in the round. Or there's been conversation, I know Davey kind of spoken a little bit about it, where it's about changing the economy on the CT side as well to make it a little bit more fair there, so it's punishing. What do you think needs to kind of be changed to make MR12 a little bit more fair across the board, so that people aren't stuck in this situation where they're playing, you know, 6 of the rounds on their CT side on just pistols, for example?
So personally, I'm super concerned about making too many changes at once. I think the problem with doing that is that it's really hard to figure out which of the changes you were making that ultimately made a difference, right? So if you change to MR12 and you change smokes and you change the economy, you have no idea when the actual competitive game starts to play itself out. You have no idea which of these effects is having a good or a bad impact on the game, right? Sure. So I would say, as much as people are afraid of change, like, just let's do this now. Let's wait like 3, 4, 5 months into like 2024 or something, and then when we get there, let's have a secondary discussion and figure out, okay, what is, you know, because I think both those options are decent choices to be looking at. Like, I think, I don't know, it's not just the length of the smoke in CS2 that's worried. It's like they're so wide. I feel like when I run into smokes, I just never escape from them. I'm just lost in there for forever, basically. But maybe that's like a skill issue with me. I don't know. But I think either way, like, I'm generally opposed to making a lot of changes all on top of each other. I would say just do this now. Maybe that first major is going to be a little bit strange, and maybe there will be probably a lot of complaints from the community. That's okay. If I was Valve, I would say, that's just something that we're going to have to deal with. Yeah, we have to accept it, because if we don't do it, then we're just harming the game. But again, I would caution, I mean, I was tweeting about this at one point with some memes on top, but I would caution against people going too crazy. I think, you know, Valve, obviously not a flawless company, but they have a pretty sick track record of slowly, over time, adjusting things, you know, looking for feedback. I have an interesting anecdote that people should probably try and remember. This is back in the CSET 75 days when the gun was, and I think the same with the Tech 9 days, and those pistols were so good, and pros were complaining about it. And we were even discussing at one point, like behind the scenes, people saying maybe we should make like a gentleman's agreement not to use these weapons because they're just, you know, they're ruining the game, basically.
Yeah.
And I think somebody from Valve at one point said something to me like, if they are so good, why don't people just abuse them to the point where it becomes evident to us, Yeah. And I think there's something about that. Like, if you find out that there is some way to abuse the money system or the smokes or whatever it is in MR12, you're a professional team, it's almost your duty to try and make it as grotesque as possible, as early as humanly possible, because that's the only way that Valve are going to kind of notice and say, oh, damn, this team really has broken the game, fine, we can change it, right? But if you're just complaining about it, but it's not showing up in any data, there's no obvious way to see it, like it's just, in theory, it's going to be bad, but no one's actually sort of going overboard with it, then I think it's going to be hard to test. So I would say, yeah, if somebody discovers a way to completely break the meta in MR12, then go forward and just hammer that home. Show us all as early as possible.
Well, there we go. Thank you very much, Anders, brother. I really appreciate jumping on and taking the time, man. All right, so I'm joined by none other than Nero from HLTV, the man who you've already kind of done a little bit of an article on this, so you should have at least some thought process. HLTV, they've had their thoughts, they've done their thing, but I'm going to start off nice and basic. Where do you stand on the whole MR12 argument of it changing into the competitive scene heading into CS2? Where do you lie?
I think I'm very slightly pro, but I think a lot needs to change, and I think there's other ways they could have achieved the same thing, but I think I ultimately, slightly pro.
Okay, and why? Why are you pro? What for you is kind of the advantage? Is it kind of, shortening the game times mean that we can have kind of a little bit of an easier watching day? Where do you lie? What reason?
Yeah, I think that's the main thing is that games are too long. Like, games are just way too long. Like, especially now I'm an adult. Like, I think when I was a kid, it was fine. Like, you could put a game on and it didn't really matter. But now you're an adult, you're like, 4 hours for like one game? Like, I'm not going to watch all of it. I'm just not going to watch all of it. Like, if I didn't work in the scene, I wouldn't watch a full best of 3. And I think trimming it down to like the kind of 2 to 3 hour average is like, that's still quite long. I know other esports are longer. Everyone was moaning at me about that article. It was just like, where's cricket? Where's cricket? It's like, it's completely different. Like, do we want Counter-Strike to be a second monitor sport or not? Because if it's going to be 4 hours, map 1 and 2 are going to be on my second monitor. They are. Yeah. And that's kind of, I know it's not the purest thing to say, but I think it needs to be shorter and attention spans are only getting shorter on everything, and that's where I'm at with it. I do think I would have preferred to see them try out MR15, but with shorter smokes, shorter Molotovs, because I think there is an element of, especially with pistol rounds staying, and I think they should stay, maybe with a bit of changes, but I think they should stay. I think you're looking at maybe not enough time to adapt. I know other people have said this isn't an original point, but those extra 3 rounds are like the key rounds where you've worked out those tendencies. Like, the last 3 rounds of a half are the really interesting ones a lot of the time.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're going to lose those rounds. And I think I'd rather have shorter rounds because the game's only really got too long after the round time it went up to 155.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of, like, I looked at it in that article. That's the turning point when it comes to that. So I would have probably tried, like, even in beta, and okay, it might be rubbish. It might be awful and everyone's just staying behind smokes the whole time, but like, if you make, I think you can tweak the smokes a little bit. I think too much of Counter-Strike is sitting behind smokes, and that was before they made the smokes literally longer in CS2. Like, this is but MR12, I think it's kind of a necessary evil to bring the game length down, and I think that's why I just have to be positive about it, because there's not really an easy way to do it other than the round timer thing I mentioned, and that has a lot of other moving parts that are hard to work out.
So on the other side, what worries you about it? I know there's been quite a few conversations about economy being pretty rough, especially the CT side. Yeah. Like, if you lose both pistols, I know our mutual friend Elliot, he's pretty pissed off about it, right? But obviously, like, there's kind of, I can warrant some of the ideas in the sense that if you lose both pistols and you're on the CT side, or if you're on the CT side and you lose a pistol, like, you are just kind of fucked for a while because your economy is so out of whack, and before you know it, only half of the half is gone. So where do you lie in terms of maybe other changes need to happen? Maybe the kind of CT economy needs to be slightly adjusted or something like that?
Yeah, I think definitely. But people are blaming MR12 for something that is an issue in MR15 as well, right? Like, the CT economy is completely fucked and has been since they changed it. And if it takes MR12 for people to realize that, then honestly, that's a good thing. Like, that's a good thing. See, on CT side, you need to win with 3 people alive, like, every time you win a round. Like, this is why saving is such a big thing as well. Like, because if you're in a 2v4 and you win it with 1 person alive, like, it's actually worse for you. It's like a complete Pyrrhic victory. Like, it's not good for you long term to win that round. Yeah. So that's what needs looking at. It's too easy to be a T in the new economy as well, and I think MR12, they're going to snowball a lot because they're just going to buy every single round. It's just going to be insufferable. Like everyone's saying, oh, you should just go 1900 straight away, and it's like T sides would be even worse. Like they get 800 each for planting the bomb. Like that's just something that's just been there forever, and no one questions it. But that it's ridiculous.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. I think if you do 400 for Ts for planting, 400 for CTs for defusing, split it in half.
Okay, all right.
Fuck it. Now we're talking, right? And then MR12 was fine because it's the same amount of gun rounds deciding a game as there was before the economy update, when it was like you got 3 double ecos and a half. Like if Valve just want to get rid of eco rounds with the economy, and then MR12 justifies doing that because it's still like 8-10 gun rounds deciding a match, right? So that's the logic, but then they've got it to a point where it's actually still more, and it's just so hard to be a CT. Like it was covered up by the M4 being OP and the AUG being OP, but now we're here. Like I don't like how you have to play on CT side because of the economy.
Right. So you're optimistic in the sense that it'd be good for the casual viewer, which I agree with. I definitely think it
and player,
yeah, fundamentally it's an entertainment product as well when it comes down to it. So to have it to be more entertaining is good, but there's a lot of tweaks that need to be done before it's even remotely kind of viable in your eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll be fine. I think already, like if you're gonna win 13 rounds, you probably deserve to win the game like 99% of the time. Like it's very rare, but I know people are gonna say it's the magic of those rare comebacks and everything like that.
For example, the ancient.
Yeah, but MR12 changes too many things. I don't think it's as simple as saying first to 13. Like the pressure will just come on earlier. Like teams like FaZe will wake up at 10 rounds, 11 rounds instead of at
13,
14. Like
yeah,
this is like nothing in CS happens in a vacuum, and I think MR12 is like we're a bit too wedded to the 16 rounds thing. It's not actually that important. It's just, I think you just need to fix the economy and specifically the CT side, because I think there's enough gun rounds. I think we're at a good number of gun rounds. They're just too skewed towards the T side, and I still think best of ones, obviously, they've just got to go. Like, but we've said that in MR15. Like, that definitely shouldn't be a thing in MR12. Like, and the broadcast days, like everyone's saying they should do 4 best of 3s. Like, I'm so opposed to that. It's not even funny.
It's a
like,
long day.
No, like stop doing this. Just stop doing this. This is insane to have just these long days because it's one crew.
Yeah, exactly. Just
and it's one crew doing it,
and a whole nother series on top of it. It's gonna be
it's just
too much, surely.
Yeah, it's gonna be these online cups. They're gonna do it. We all know they're gonna do it. It's gonna be shit. But if I see like a real tournament, like a non-Mickey Mouse tournament, trying to do it, it's
raps.
It's gonna be a shit show. You're gonna have Katowice 2016 where they're playing with the lights off and the crowd have gone home.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
We can't have that. We just can't have that.
Brother, thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it. We'll move on to kind of our next guest. Alrighty, so I'm joined by none other than Davey himself, Canadian's finest. Brother, so you've been pretty vocal about MR12. You've kind of spoken about changes that need to be made, changes that you want to implement maybe prior or before MR12. Talk me through where you stand right now in terms of MR12, for or against, or if you are for, what needs to be changed.
I mean, yeah, I don't really care. I think that there's I guess what I care about more is that the games need to be shorter.
Yes.
And we need to have more kills. Okay, those are that should be the goal. And if Valve thinks the best way to do that is MR12, that's fine. If other people think the best way to do that is to make the round time lower from 155 to 145, that's fine too. Whatever way people want to decide to make the game shorter, I'm on board with. So I don't care if it's MR12. I don't care if it's shorter round times. I don't care about. But the problem is, MR12 only addresses the issue of making the game shorter. It doesn't address any of the other issues. So when I see people on Twitter saying that MR12 means that teams are going to save less, it's like, yes, in the sense of that, like if everything in the game is a fraction, if right now we have 15 rounds, so now we're going to have 12 rounds, so that means teams, instead of saving 5 rounds a game, are now going to save 4 rounds a game. But it's the same amount of like the same percentage amount is going to be saved. The gameplay is not going to change. It's just going to be shorter. And so if anything, it'll encourage teams to save more, if anything. But I don't actually know about that. Like, I've sort of like been thinking about it, and I think that what I just said the first time is is more accurate, where like it's all just going to be exactly the same because they're not changing any of like the core things in the game, the core game concepts that will enable a change in the meta.
Sure.
So that's where so that was the only reason why I was so like it seemed like I was fighting with the MR12 people, but I wasn't actually fighting with the MR12 people. I just wanted to point out that like this isn't going to save the game. Yeah,
So-
it's not going to save the gameplay.
What do you think will? If you had the choice here, what do you think you would do? Maybe let's go with the assumption that MR12 is going to be implemented, and it like, you know, we don't have a choice there. That is going to happen into the kind of the pro scene. What do you think needs to be changed alongside it? I know I've had conversations about maybe changing the CT economy to make it a little bit fairer, so you know they don't get kind of destroyed, which kind of happens quite a lot. So you know it kind of denies the T side from snowballing a little bit. Ner0 mentioned about something of having, you know, CT's getting 400 for a defuse, but T's only getting 400 for a bomb plant, so maybe makes their economy a little bit even. What do you think would need to be implemented alongside MR12? Let's go with the assumption that it is going to be implemented regardless, to then make the games kind of have more kills, less saving, you know, not as long essentially, and actually change things a little bit.
Well, I think that there's a bunch of different things that I would like to try. Like, you know, if I could hypothetically just like, okay, let's just test this in matchmaking for a week. Okay, let's just test this. Like, I would like there's a couple different things, but again, I think the important thing is to look at, okay, what do we want to accomplish here?
Yeah.
We don't want the entire game to become incredibly CT sided. Valve has been fairly consistent in their approach to designing maps, where they want the maps to be as even as possible. They don't really want T-sided maps. They don't really want CT-sided maps. And so the game, even now with that, already leans CT side. So people are complaining about the CT economy and how hard it is and all these things, but at the same time, the game still leans CT side, right? So even with all that, we have to be careful about just buffing CTs, because the game will become like way too CT-sided if that happens, which again would be fine if that like you could make an argument that the game should be heavily CT sided, because that makes T side more interesting to watch, because the good T side team, you know, they have to do so much more, whatever. Like, there's arguments for that, but I don't think that's the best way to do it. I think that ideally you want to encourage as much as possible every player in the round to try to win that round as often as possible.
Yes.
So in a 2v4, you want to encourage them to try to win the 2v4, but you need to incentivize it. It can't just be like people aren't just going to do it because the next round is more important. You know, you have better odds in the next round. That's why the save meta exists now.
Yeah.
So the best ways to do that are to not punish people for going for it. So changing the reward system, or alternatively, you could punish people for saving. Like, for example, on CT side, if you save, you get 0 bonus, just like on T side, right? You don't get that extra bonus if you save. That's one way you could do it. That would just disincentivize it that little bit more. That wouldn't stop saving completely, but it would disincentivize it. I've had this idea that I've talked to a couple different people about that seems to get generally decent feedback, in the sense of like, this is probably worth trying. That instead of round loss bonus, you just have a players alive bonus. So at the end of the round, depending on how many people saved, that determines how much money you get for the next round. So if you have 5 people save, you get $0. If you have 4 people saved, you get 1,400. If you have 3 people saved, you get 1,900. So we can use all the same scale still, but just do it instead of the number of rounds in a row, it's the number of people saved. So like, for example, if you're in a 2v5 and you have an AWP and an M4, you're probably still going to save that, but you're only going to get 2,400 bonus for the rest of the team the next round. But that still is probably going to be worth it than just going for it, losing and getting 3,400.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's one way to encourage it. And I think so far that in my opinion, of course, it was my idea. So I think it's the best.
Yeah.
So of course I think it's the best. But I haven't heard a better alternative to that yet.
I like it. And final question, is a brief one as well. How do you think MR12 is going to affect kind of the skill ceiling? Do you think whether the pro scene is going to get better or worse? Because obviously there's the whole thing about how good IGLs activate late in towards games because they really start to understand them, but there's less of the game. Or do you think good IGLs are going to have to be better at understanding the game in a shorter span of time, so therefore the skill ceiling gets higher? Or do you think it's going to, because it's less rounds, it's lower and maybe slightly more randomized? Where do you think things will go in the pro scene?
That's a good question. It's almost too hard to answer right now, just because we don't know what CS2 is actually going to look like.
Yeah.
Like right now, I would say it would change the scene a lot because T's would almost always be doing fast rounds on T side. Like the pace would be so much quicker, just because if you get into, like, for example, if you get into B site on Inferno right now as a T and you have 3 smokes still, it's over for the CT. Like it's impossible to retake. The smokes last so long and are there for so long. So I think that right now it would mean that the IGLs that like faster pace CS would end up being way better. But I have a feeling the smokes are going to change because they're just a little bit too strong right now. So that would also change that. So I'm not entirely sure, but I think that generally more fast-paced IGLs will be more meta in the early times of CS2.
I like it. Well, David, thank you very much for taking the time, brother. I really appreciate coming on.
No worries.
And, well, there we go. So I'm joined by none other than Aizyesque himself, a pretty avid anti-MR12 man. He's been pretty vocal. Obviously, you know, I feel like I don't really need to ask, but where do you stand on the whole MR12 argument? I feel like you've made it pretty clear you're anti-MR12. You're pretty against it, but why? What's your reasons right now?
So one of the things I love about Counter-Strike is the adaptations you can make on the T side and how that sets apart the good and the great in-game leaders.
Okay.
Good in-game leaders will have a plan. Great in-game leaders can adapt to what the opposition are doing and will see what they're doing and they'll improve. That tends to take a few rounds to get into. How many times have you seen a team be 7-0 down on the T side of overpass and recover and post 6, 7, sometimes even win the half? I mean, that's obviously rare, but sometimes it takes 6, 7 rounds to really understand how the CT side are setting up and understand how best to manipulate that. And by going to MR12, you really distill that down and you lose a little bit of the magic. Those last 3 rounds of the half tend to be the ones where teams know each other well and can actually adapt, and the mind games really come into play. And I always think those tend to be the better rounds. Also, in that, it becomes easier to upset good teams because you only have to win 1 or 2 dodgy rounds, or you can take them off with some counter strats early on, and all of a sudden you're 7-0 up, and you've already won the half. It means that these gimmick rounds, and you pull them out, have more impact because they are quite literally just worth 20% more.
Yeah.
And I think it really kind of loses some of the magic. And I understand that people want shorter games, but I don't. I kind of get it from a playing perspective, but even then, so often I'm like, oh, I'm really getting into this game, and then it's half time, and I'm like, oh, I guess I have to change sides.
Yeah. What about the other side of thing? Like, you know, so I always like to make the kind of the analogy that, like, fundamentally Counter-Strike and esports as a whole is an entertainment product, right? And obviously, you know, it's the same thing with regular sports in a way. I mean, obviously, we kind of saw that graph that HTV did. We were talking about how CS goes longer than, like, most sports and esports anyway. But, like, for a casual fan, right, you know, if we're talking, you know, some best of threes lasting 3.5 hours, they're not going to watch the whole thing. And that, do you think that is a bad thing in a sense, that basically only the diehards stick around for the full game?
I don't think every single game needs to be catered towards casuals. I don't think casual fans are as important as the hardcore fans, and that sounds kind of elitist, but every game in the modern era tries to appeal to the casuals. I don't want to say Valorant appeals to the casuals because I actually don't think it does at all. But there are parts of it where it's like the gunplay is a little bit easier. The games are a little bit shorter, and it's like, oh, it's for the casual fans. It's like, well, there has to be some games for people who aren't casual, and Counter-Strike has always been that. And I think that's kind of a waste, honestly. I think it's a waste to take what separates Counter-Strike from the casual games. I think that's a real shame.
So think of the other side. Let's go with the thought process, which is probably going to be most likely true, that Valve just don't give a fuck about, you know, people like you who are pretty anti, right? And they're just going to go for it. What do you think needs to change? 'Cause I think this is a conversation that's been had as well, where we talk about seat-side economy, for example, where, you know, or the other sort of thing where just generally the economy, if you lose 2 pistols, the game kind of feels fucked anyway, like in such a short span of time. So what do you think needs to change? If we're going to go with the thought process that MR12 is happening, whether you like it or not, what do you think needs to be kind of the adaptations, whether it's economy or... And I'll speak to Nero, and he was talking about maybe reducing the times of smokes and Molotovs, for example.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
So
I think that actually I think that's actually a more elegant solution than MR12 is to keep it MR15, but shorten the round timer back to 145 and maybe make the smokes and Molotov shorter, especially smokes. Like so much of the game is spent sat behind smokes waiting for them to fade.
CS2 is longer as well. Those smokes are endless.
I won't get into CS2. We will. This fucking podcast will be endless. But yeah, no, I think that's a more elegant solution to the problem. Part of the reason it feels so long is that teams have figured out that you should just save more often.
Yeah.
And I don't think MR12 fixes that. If anything, I think there's a chance it makes it worse purely because the way the economy is at the moment is set up for 15 rounds a half.
Yeah.
Whatever. I think they'll eventually change the economy, but I don't think that's the problem. Like, that's never been the problem to me. The problem has never been, oh, the economy is set up for 15. The problem is that the game, you're supposed to have 15 rounds to have all these plays. Like,
yeah,
you really do. It just makes everything a little bit more. There's going to be less variation. You only need, like, you probably only get 7 gun rounds on the T side. You only need like 4 or 5 different rounds. Like, when you have 15 rounds, you need a lot more depth to your T side. I just think it's going to make the difference between good and great in-game leaders very different. And I don't think changing the economy helps that. I much prefer the solution of making the rounds slightly shorter and making utility lasts slightly shorter, because you're right. I do think Valve are just going to keep MR12 despite what anyone asks, despite what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
I don't know how they can make MR12 feel better than MR15. To me personally, I don't think there is any way they can do that.
So finally, from a hardcore esports side of thing, do you think going to like some MR12 is going to lower the skill ceiling because it allows for more offsets, or do you think it's going to raise it because people, IGLs and players have less time to work with? So, maybe we always talk about FaZe activating really late in towards games, for example. They have to do it a lot earlier. Do you think it's going to overall raise the skill ceiling or lower it?
Oh, FaZe are absolutely goobed. They've got no chance. I think it's going to lower the skill ceiling. I think it has to. Like, the less time you have for something, the more variation you introduce. And how often do you see a underdog team get to like 12-12 or 13-11, and then it's like, oh, okay, we've got to turn it on now, and then Heroic or Vitality or oftentimes FaZe would just actually show that they are the better team in that time. And you can say, oh, they'll just do it at like 10-8, but it's not always that easy. Like, teams can run 5 counter-strat rounds, and you've given up 12 rounds, and you have to then adapt. And that is what makes Counter-Strike great to me, but apparently other people disagree.
So we're losing some of the magic in your eyes. We're losing some of the, I mean, obviously, people talk about the Ents, the ancient game, right? Probably one of the best games of, I think you did a tweet about that.
Yeah. That game ends in regulation. It ends like 13-10 or something. I think. So there is a world though on the other side, obviously, kind of with not knowing that we do see a little bit more of kind of, great IGLs come forward in this, old kind of younger IGLs, I guess, come forward because they have a better understanding. But overall, you're definitely in the side of kind of anti-MR12, and this is overall going to worsen the esport. I think so.
Do you think it'll bring more viewership though? Maybe even, as much as you talk about the lack of the casual side.
I don't think anyone who isn't watching Counter-Strike is not watching it because there's 30 rounds instead of 24. I don't think anyone is going to go, oh, there's less of it now. Yeah, that sounds much better. Like, I don't think that's true. Maybe I'm wrong, because you can point to like what T20 has done for cricket. But obviously that is a much more drastic change from, Test cricket being 5 days to T20 being like 3 hours.
Yeah.
But I'm always going to dislike it.
Fair enough. But we'll see what happens. But Elliot, AZ, mate, I really appreciate taking the time. Of course, last but not least, I guess we get into my opinion, where I stand. So this one was pretty tough for me. I think I was definitely on the fence both ways when it was first announced. And after having a little bit of time to have research, I'm going to fight the battle both ways and make an argument about where I stand at the end. So in terms of the against side of things, I feel like right now, MR12 doesn't fundamentally change anything about the game. We talk about kind of the length of games, and yes, you minus a few rounds, but there's still going to be a lot of things like saving. We look towards maps like Inferno. Inferno even feels more harder now to retake. Right now, essentially, there's no incentive for CTs to go for a retake. And that's the big thing for me. You know, if you're a CT side, it's a 3 versus 3. If you lose just one person in the long term, having only 2 remaining alive, you are going to be worse off than just having 3 staying alive. It's as simple as that, right? It's a battle of economics in the long term. And of course, there isn't too much of a long term within MR12 now. So you have to be even more careful about your finances. I think right now, there's nothing that incentivizes teams to maybe, you know, attempt to retake, attempt a 2v4, attempt a 3v3. And that, for me, I think is a fundamental issue that needs to be fixed first. I think there probably needs to be some sort of balancing towards the economies. I feel like right now, if you're a CT side, you use the pistol, you're realistically going to go 3-0 down, which is not good, obviously. The T side are going to build up a lot of economy. And then in your first full buy round, you lose that, you are fucked. It's kind of like 5 rounds down. In an MR12 game, already before you know it, you're in a lot of trouble. I think as well, the other thing, if you lose both pistols, you're essentially losing 6 rounds off the trot unless you pull off a really janky force buy and somehow manage to make it work. But statistically, you're likely, if you lose both pistols, to go essentially 6-0 down. It's pretty rough. Something Davey mentioned as well was that reducing the rounds isn't going to reduce the percentage of how often people save or how often people give go on retakes. He was talking about kind of fractions, and I think he's absolutely spot on. I think that is a fundamental problem right now. Like we said, there's nothing really to incentivize it, and I think there's a world as well in which this will benefit slightly more puggy teams just because of how long, you know, smokes last in CS and how hard it is in terms of going for that retake. Now with how utilities slightly different, Molotovs feel a little bit more punishing. Smokes are longer, wider, bigger in every way. So then again, trying to get through them is super tough. So you have all of these decisions that come through. I think for me, the change of MR12 is the first in a line of maybe a few that need to be made, right? I think probably a little bit of a buff to the economy. Obviously, Nero's idea they brought up earlier about the 400 for a defuse bonus for CTs is pretty good. I quite like that. I feel like it's quite fair, but then there is a worry about things getting too CT-sided too. I mean, as we look at Counter-Strike as a whole, or CSGO as a whole, more or less everything is meant to be weighted in favor of the CT side. You know, your slightly worse rifle, but generally everything is favored in their side. So you can't really then flip things and make it too CT-sided. So there's a bit of a balancing issue there. There's been conversations had where you take away 1.4k loss bonus for CTs and just start 1.9. I guess that's another thing that maybe could help out things in the long term. But again, it is a very tough decision to be had. But then there's the pro side. I think there's a lot of things that got to be taken into account here. I think we've seen as well with essentially the success of Valorant, how MR12, first of all, works in a competitive scene, works well. It was also used in CS back in Source, from right and saying, way back when. It's like 2010 era and before. Way before my time, right? I was just a child back then. But it was used before, so something that has been kind of at the core of Counter-Strike as a brand for something for a while. But you got to look at the casual viewer. I think right now with that graph that AleksiB did where they showed that an average best of 3 that goes 3 maps is longer than basically every traditional sport bar cricket. But cricket's a different story. It is long. That's the nature of cricket, right? So I think bar literally every sport and pretty much every esport as well, it's the longest by a long way, and it makes the casual viewing experience tough. I've got friends of mine who are casual viewers of Counter-Strike, and they won't watch a whole best of 3, especially if it goes 3 maps. They'll maybe watch 1 or 2, but if it goes 3 and it's, you know, it's 3 hours out of the day, it's just too big of a commitment for them. So theoretically, having more casual people involved as well is only fundamentally a good thing. There's no downsides having more eyes on the product, more people wanting to watch, and even maybe a world in which more people go to events because they're like, well, rather than this one best of 5 being 9 hours out of my day, it's probably only going to be like 6. So I could go for a day, you know, I make 6 hours out of it. It's not the biggest commitment in the world in comparison to being like, yeah, are you going to be able to stay here for 9 hours? And I think that you like, kind of, but like don't love, right? So I think for the casual viewing experience, it's really, really important. I think it's a good thing. We're going to have, most likely, I hope that this doesn't now incentivize TOs to then do 4 best of 3s a day, because then that just doesn't solve the problem. And it's kind of, it's pretty brutal, basically only on themselves. Obviously, most likely, you know, for us casters, we normally split shifts anyway. So it's normally, you only do 2 best of 3s regardless. Or sometimes even just 1 a day, right? So it doesn't really kind of affect us as much. But yeah, I think for the casual viewing experience, it's really important. I think for the casual player base as well, it's very important. I think it's a really good thing. Like for myself personally, and I think Leadify did a graph basically confirming this, that more people now play short games rather than long games. And I was the same. Whenever I played with my friends, only myself being actually involved in esports, the others just fans of the game, we would only ever play short games because we want to play as many different maps as possible just to have a kind of a fun evening. It was always a casual experience. Playing a long game is brutal, and I know myself personally, I've been playing a lot of CS2 recently. When I've gone to overtime, I'm getting towards kind of like 14 or I'm like, fuck me, like this is a long ass game, dude. But that was just a normal game way back. So that's one of those things for me. I feel like right now it's going to help a lot on the casual base, and I think that's only a good thing. I think there's a world in which it brings in more eyes on the product. It grows the game, which I think fundamentally, obviously, is what Valve are going to be wanting here. They're obviously putting a lot of time and effort into making this work. I think in the esport as well, it's going to call upon IGLs to maybe be a little bit more clued in early, or teams, everyone likes use FaZe as an example, but it is probably just because it's the best example, where they're a side who just for some reason only ever turn on when the pressure's on, basically. Diamonds are made under pressure, right? And that is kind of what FaZe are all about. And I feel like there's a world now in which this is just going to happen earlier, which is a good thing. It's only a good thing. I feel like if we have a game which has more buy rounds in a shorter span of time, it just makes a more exciting product. More buy rounds in a smaller time window means just generally more exciting games. There's no long-winded double ecos, or hopefully, right? Or there's no long-winded problems where they're force buying so often with like into MP9s and just constantly fucking their own economy. So I think for me, this feels like it's a good thing overall in terms of the esport, which it should make it more exciting. And something I spoke about on a podcast recently on 4x3, I was talking about how right now for me, it feels like CS2 benefits faster paced teams. It feels like if you're a very, very aggressive, you get a lot of leeway. Of course, the peak advantage might be fixed. It probably should be fixed in some regard. But then, like we said, if you get on towards the site and you drop a smoke, these smokes last like 20 seconds already, and they're massive. They're so hard to go through, and you can't see anything. Even the view is worse than what it is in CS:GO, right? So you're already kind of even more visually impaired, as well as them being bigger, wider, taller, etc., etc. So I feel like right now, if you're a puggy team who get, let's say you take B site, you've kind of won the round already. So I feel like for me, that just fundamentally makes the game more exciting. So all in all, where I stand, I am pro MR12, not all the way Anders level, probably a little bit more than Nero, I'd say, kind of a good chunk in the green, basically. Just saying that I think I like what they're doing here. I think this is just going to make a more exciting product. It's going to make it better for the casuals, better for the hardcore guys as well, because there's going to be more time, or there's less time essentially for IGLs to make good decisions. So they've got to make good decisions from the get-go. They've got to figure out a game plan way earlier than what we see now, where they're figuring it out in kind of the last 4 or 5 rounds of a half. So for me, that feels really, really good. I can't see a world in which is a downside. I do think it comes with a few changes that need to be made alongside it, but something that Anders brought up, and it's absolutely spot on, if Valve make more than one change at a time, there is just no way to figure out what change is wrong, what changes needs buffing, nerfing, etc. So you've got to do it one step at a time. One thing that does worry me, of course, is that the open quals for the RMR is in January, and we are now getting to the end of September. So there isn't a lot of time. There's realistically going to be essentially 2 months to work with to get ready, then heading in towards the open quals for the RMR, which is going to be chaos. And also because they're best of ones in MR12, that as well feels janky for me. I feel like there's a world now in which best of ones are going to start to become obsolete, and probably should be. I mean, we've been calling on it for a long time anyway, but having best of ones in MR12 is, I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of that. I feel like that really leaves the game up to a lot of chance. One hot streak and you've essentially won it. So we'll see how things pan out, but that's where I stand. I'm pro MR12. I think it's generally going to be a good thing. Obviously, we don't know just yet what other changes are going to come with, but I think right now it feels like it's a change for the better. If it brings over a little bit more of a casual fan base, there's also a world as well in which it can tempt over, kind of jangle the pouch of money, or so to say, in front of kind of youngsters who maybe attempted to play a little bit of Valorant, or attempted to go to kind of another esport, maybe just being like, well, if you're happy to play Valorant in MR12, why not do it in CS:GO, right? Where the tier 2 circuits are significantly stronger and more stable. There's probably an easier pathway to pro here, so why not give it a go? So I feel like for me, it is generally a very good thing. As much as Valorant want to claim that MR12 is them CS did it way before, so unlucky. There's a few things that we've taken from them that are good, but overall, I'm very excited to see how this one changes out. Thank you very much to my guests for coming on, Anders, Nero, Aizyesque, and Davey. Pleasure to have you guys on as well. You're very vocal on Twitter, so it's the perfect guests to bring on for this one. And of course, for you wonderful people at home watching, thank you very much for joining for this video. It's been a pleasure. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, so let me know down below where you stand on the whole MR12 debate. Are you pro? Are you against it? And why? I'd love to hear kind of your reasons. Or maybe you might do a follow-up heading in towards maybe the likes of the RMR or such and such. For now, though, ladies and gents, thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, on all the rest if you're new around here. And until next time, I'll see you soon.